So Steve runs our brokerage part of the business here in Australia with lots of used boats, and Jason's already a well-established broker in New Zealand and set in charge of helping building our brokerage in the New Zealand and South Pacific market. And I guess that today's discussion is really to give some feedback for what we're seeing in the industry in terms of boats being sold. You know, is it a disaster in the market for people thinking about selling? Is there opportunities for buyers and sellers? What is the state of the industry, given what we're going through at the moment? And it's a little bit different as it is in, between New Zealand and Australia, and also different from state to state in Australia, obviously, and different for different parts of the world. But we're just going to talk, I guess, more around our experience in terms of what we're seeing here. And I thought I'd start just because I'm involved mostly on new boat sales, and give everyone a little bit of feedback as to what we've experienced, which has been a somewhat unexpected surge in boat sales over the last few months, which was a nice surprise, but also probably gives us some insights as to what people are doing now that travel is heavily restricted. Holidays, certainly international holidays, are heavily restricted, and obviously there's importance to self-isolate to a degree. Some tighter restrictions in some areas than others, but certainly keeping a safe distance seems to be important, particularly for the demographic that tend to buy cruising catamarans. So we've gone through a pretty strong period over the last few months of new sales, both between Seawind, Ultramare, and the Aquila brands that we sell. And in fact, I'm just looking at some stats here for new boat inquiries over the last few months. We've seen in the month of August our new boat inquiries go up 36% between this year and last year. Last month was huge, it was a 71% increase in inquiries, and even June was a 46% spike in inquiries, and sales are up considerably in line with that as well. And certainly when we went into lockdown back in, when was it, April, for a period there, we had it was a slow sales period, but very strong interest period. So in fact, anyone following Seawind will have known that their sales for the new 1370s stretched out for some years in advance now. They're up to close to 40 boats sold on that new range. Even the Seawind 1260 range is sold out. Ultramare doing well, and we had a new, I think we got 3 Ultramare 55s on order from new Australian buyers, and we have some new Aquila 44s that have recently been ordered in the last couple of months. So that I thought was interesting from new boats, as far as the fact that we're now getting into a position where there's low availability of new boat stock, looking somewhat between 2 years to 3 years for production availability on some of the different lines, some earlier, but some a longer line wait list. And as a result, I think people wanting to lay down some plans for the future and have something to look forward to. Steve, used boats are different because it's a much more immediate result and ability to get on the water virtually straight away. What's been the interest level recently with used boats? Has it been similar?
Yeah, look, it's obviously used boats in April when we were sort of all, you know, getting sort of shocked by the COVID thing. It really hit the wall and stopped, I think, similar to new boats, and we were all thinking to ourselves, you know, this is, I don't think we sold a used boat in April, and it was quite, you know, quite alarming. However, since then, with the restrictions of travel, with people realising they're going to be holidaying at home for the next probably number of years, we've found a few things. People would, here at the yacht club at our office, we saw quite a number of people heading north on their boats, so they're actually using their boats. The work areas are full. People realising they're not going to go to Europe for 3 months, they're going to be in Australia, so they're getting on board and using their boats. And the interest in boats that we'd had sitting around for a little while certainly spiked. We've had a great few months now, and there's certainly lots of interest with people that have, realising the holidaying at home is what is going to be the new normal in the next couple of years. So there's plenty of interest around and plenty of people using their boats, which is great.
Yeah, I'm just looking at some stats here. So June and July were marginally up about 10% each month, but the month of August is up 87% in inquiries between this year and last year, which is quite an extreme increase. And obviously, there's an expectation borders will open soon, one would hope, coming months, but who knows? Yeah. Who knows?
Yeah. I hope so. That is one of the difficulties of selling used boats at the moment. If the boat's in Queensland and the customer's in New South Wales, well, it's got its challenges. However, people are working around it. We're showing a boat tomorrow to a guy. He's in Sydney. He's not in Sydney. He's in Port Macquarie, I think. And his family are coming to look at it, and an old friend that lives in Wynnum are coming to look at it. So we're, and they're doing surveys and so forth, and people are buying boats that they haven't actually seen, which is quite astounding. If you told me that 10 years ago, I would never have believed it. However, I think when it's a production boat like a Seawind or the French boats or something, it is quite, and it's a lot easier for us to explain the condition of a production boat. And people are confident. We've been around a while, and they trust us, and they are buying boats without seeing them.
Yeah, I think it's actually a really interesting point, because I've done a couple of Zoom walkthrough tours of boats to help people that aren't close by here, get a good understanding of what they're looking at, what they're buying into, and obviously it's important to have a good surveyor, to give that third party insight into the boat and give a good report on it, so people know exactly what they're getting. But it's certainly a lot more possible than what it used to be, I think, with the aid of technology and video streaming, where we can give instant feedback and point the camera to wherever they want to look on the boat, which is just a lot more possible these days than it was some time ago. But yeah, it's interesting. I think just the nature of the fact that boating is probably one of those few things you can do, in a safe little bubble, and a lot of the other distractions of travel and stuff's gone away. Do you think that's having an impact, Steve, on what you...
Oh, by all means. Like, as I said, people are using their boats. They can't go to, if they're in New South Wales, they can't go to Queensland for a holiday. Victoria, obviously the same. We can't go to, we're restricted to our area. And I think that's why I was talking to the CEO of the yacht club here the other day, and they've got, their berthages up on their pens, the work areas are up, and people are, doing what they can do, and that is get out on their boats. And the people that have been, dreaming of this for some years, and you and I know that it does take a bit of time to make a decision to buy a boat. Well, some of these people are bringing these decisions forward, and it's it's certainly creating a lot of interest in the market. So.
Yeah. And what about in New Zealand, Jason? I mean, obviously it's been a different scenario over there. You guys have really gone through a very tight lockdown period, but I think now that's been relaxed even in Auckland. You're seeing people move around, and inquiries on boats are getting back to what it was?
Yes, it only really dropped off in the early stages when we were in lockdown back in March, April, May, and since then, the inquiry rate has still been pretty good. People are moving around New Zealand. There was a little bit of a lockdown period recently with just Auckland, and that kind of made Northland an island, so we couldn't actually have anyone come from anywhere else. But we're certainly getting inquiries from all over the country in New Zealand, and yes, people are coming to look at boats. And I would say that in the used market here, we would be doing about the same as we were doing last year.
Yeah, really? Right, okay.
Except
and
the
you're finding,
difference,
is that mostly the domestic local market, obviously, and the international market's still locked out of town? But
yes, well, that was just something that I was interested in, Steve was saying about people buying boats without seeing them. I presume that's people in Australia. Would that be correct, Steve?
Yes, it is. We did have one person who was an Australian in America that was coming back. He nearly bought a boat off us, and I think he just got a bit nervous at the end. There was another, from memory, one of the guys was dealing with, I think, another American, and it was a bit difficult. There was a few challenges with that, but definitely within Australia, where we've sold a few boats that are the clients are in a different state, and the boat is in a different state. And as Brent just said, you know, really hard survey, a really good walk around the boat, and especially if it's a production boat, which is sort of my specialty, it's a lot easier to sell them because they're a known product. You know, whether it be Seawind or Ultramar or Lightwave or Fontaine Lagoon. So I found it, the production boats can certainly be bought like that.
yeah, and I think it's important too that shipping is still very much a means of moving boats around the world between different markets. And you know, we're seeing at the moment, you know, we've got a boat arriving. We've almost got 2 new boats arriving here every month for the next few months from the various manufacturing locations, and that hasn't really changed. We're able to put the boat on the ship them, and take delivery here. Steve there, and take delivery here and set them up and go cruising without, you know, really any restriction in the local area or on the boat. And there's no reason why that wouldn't be possible on a used boat. It's just, I guess, getting the confidence around, you know, what you're buying. And again, I think that really comes back to a good broker at the other end, giving a good detailed tour and a good survey report that you know, gives you a good picture of what you're looking at. One thing we have noticed with regards to shipping is that container shipping has gone up considerably for boats, which has added a bit of an expense. But break bulk freight is still very competitive, which a lot of the boats are shipped on around the world anyway. So that still seems to be very much an open door to move boats between markets. So, you know, potentially someone could be buying a boat, whether it's from Australia or from the States or from Asia, and move the boats via ship. But you've got to have obviously good people at both ends to help with that, and look after the commissioning on both sides. Jason, Opua is obviously one of the biggest ports in New Zealand to welcome foreign-owned vessels normally into the country, and around this time of the year, or towards the later part of the year when cyclone season kicks in, you have quite a few boats usually arrive. And there's been a lot of speculation around what's going to happen with the borders in New Zealand and even Australia for boats out in the Pacific. Have you heard any more discussion about that at all? What might be happening with those boats?
Yeah, well, you're right. Opua is the first port of entry into New Zealand, being at the top of the country. And I did hear, I was talking to a customs officer a couple of days ago, and he told me that they've taken on an increased number of staff in anticipation of an influx of these cruises, but he said they'll know at the same time that the rest of the country does. So the government hasn't as yet pushed the button and said they're coming in. We understand there's in excess of 300 cruises out there that would possibly come to New Zealand. So at this point, we're just sort of in limbo as that's regard. But certainly if they do come down here, the quarantine situation, I think from what I understand is will start from when they begin their passage. So they'll probably would have done anything from 7 to 10 days before they get here, which means that it shouldn't be too harsh for them to quarantine on their vessels, and I presume they would have to be tested as well, but we're just hoping that it will happen, and I guess we'll probably know by this time next month.
And it's probably fair to assume some of those boat owners might be looking to sell. Others might go, well, this is pretty good, we're going to keep going and stay in our little bubble here. So it's I guess hard to predict what's going to happen to the market from those cruises. But and there's also a big push to bring some of those boats back to Queensland. In fact, to Bundaberg and some of the ports of entry in Queensland, with no luck to date. So it'll be a case of wait and see in that respect. But certainly quite a number of big cruising cats out in the Pacific trying to work out where to go next. And New Zealand's always a favourite spot because obviously it's out of the cyclone area, it's lovely cruising, and the taxation situation's a little bit kinder over there, but we'll see what happens. Steve, you've just come back from Airlie Beach. We've had people speculate, what might happen to the boats in charter fleets up there. Are you seeing, a flood of listings coming on the market, or what's the situation in Airlie?
Look, I wouldn't call it listings. Sure, I went up there and we did list a big boat, and I have had over the last 3 weeks a couple of other inquiries. People are asking, what the market's like. So they're obviously thinking about, their asset that are in the charter fleets. Having said that, the charter companies are still operating. They're all running, with the assistance of some JobKeeper and so forth. They're in a difficult situation too, because at the moment, with the borders closed, they're relying on just Queensland customers. So, look, I would imagine that the numbers are down somewhat. But no, there's no flood of listings. Certainly there will be, I'm sure, but a few listings, not a flood. And hopefully when these borders reopen, everybody will benefit from it, including the charter companies.
Well, I think you're spot on there, and I think what's been must have been agonising for them is that when the borders were open, they seemed to fill up their bookings overnight, and of course when they were closed again, they had to turn away a lot of that business again. So I think it's going to have a lot to do with what happens there, and when Australia as a continent has got more outbound tourists than inbound tourists, so there's a lot of domestic tourism that can happen if there's the freedom to move around the place. So it's going to be really interesting to see, I guess, what the Queensland Premier does, but there seems to be a lot of pressure to get things moving again from a federal level. So it'd be interesting to see how long that holds out for. But you've probably got to anticipate that if the business kicks back in with free border openings, the charter boats are probably going to be doing sufficiently well enough to not necessarily sell, do you think?
Look, you know, we've been dealing with these charter companies for over 20 years now, and I sat down with a few of them, and it's exactly what happened. When the borders were open, they got a flood of bookings. They closed the borders, and then all those, they couldn't go, basically. So all those bookings, well, a big percentage have been deferred. And I would imagine when the bookings do open, that people do want to go sailing. They want, it's the most beautiful area in Australia to go sailing. And I'm sure a lot of those bookings that have been deferred will all be reactivated. So yeah, look, it's fingers crossed that we can get those borders opened, and it'll be great for the charter industry, and also for the sales industry as well. They'll be a little bit easier to sell boats.
Yeah, we've got some questions starting to float in here. We had one here from L. Is it possible to inspect and possibly purchase a vessel located in another country? Looking at boats in places like Port Moresby, Martinique and New Caledonia. So yeah, I mean, obviously there's still some restrictions there at the moment, and it really comes down to each country and whether you've got any ability to move over and move the boats in between countries. And at the moment, it's probably not possible, but probably anticipate short-termly in the future that's probably going to be possible. Certainly, in terms of purchasing the boat is doable. If you've got someone that you can trust on the other end in terms of, whether it's a broker or a surveyor or other people that are in town. So, but at the moment, it is still a little bit tricky to bring the boat home. We've had some other questions here. Has the Covid-19 pandemic lowered the asking price for sellers due to financial and travel restrictions? Well, from what I've seen, I think there's more demand, certainly in Australia, there's more demand now than there has been in some time. And interestingly, I felt that funnily enough, last year's elections had a bigger impact than what we're going through at the moment. And whether that's because of, the demographic typically buying cruising cats, either semi-retired or retired, and want to get out there and travel and do things, where, who knows, I don't know. But Steve, would you say that's true, that at the moment the demand on boats is probably higher than what it has been for a while? Yep,
and prices, no, they look, when the COVID first started, and in around that month of April, I seem to remember maybe 2 ridiculous offers that we got from, bottom feeders, which for the want of a better term. But after that, they all went away. Like our customers, I know them very well, and they've generally, our customers are quite conservative. Their wealth doesn't rise and fall, and I can hardly remember a forced sale in a catamaran in 20 years. And I think now the prices are very strong. I can look. We were talking about a Lagoon 380, I think, to a guy about a year ago, and we're talking about in the mid 3s, and he rang me a few weeks ago and he said, "Do you still think the price is right?" And I said, "Well, look, we can actually be a little cheeky at the moment because we haven't got one, and there's very few for sale. So demand is certainly there, and prices are strong."
Yeah, would you say it's a seller's market at the moment in Australia?
Yeah, sure. Look, there are still the things you've got to do. You don't. I looked at it, just an example, another Lagoon 380 about 3 weeks ago, and the boat was just terrible. It was, the doors were hanging off. And the guy looked at, and I said, look, you can't sell your boat like this. He said, can't people see through that? I said, no, they just can't. It looks awful. I said, you've got the bones of a really good boat. So what I'm getting at is there are still things you've got to do. And if and getting advice from somebody like us is paramount. And when you do those things, then the market is still strong. Yeah.
What's the stock like in New Zealand at the moment, Jason? Are you finding it's difficult to find boats to help buyers, or is it sort of business as what it was a year ago, or what's the current status?
Well, there's two markets, of course. There's the sort of local market, domestic market, but then there's the international market, and that's usually focused around cruising boats. So we get a good number of cruising boats every year, like we're expecting hopefully this year, that come in and they go on the market, whether they're marketed directly into New Zealand or internationally. Now, they're definitely running out, and we're not seeing the boats at the moment that are here with cruisers on them put them on the market to any large degree. So I would say that the market is a little bit stagnant in that area, but the local market is just still bubbling along, and people are buying boats. I would say that this year is a very interesting year, apart from COVID-19, and it's also election time next month here in New Zealand. Right. We're technically in a recession because of COVID-19, but it doesn't seem to have stopped people buying boats, because I think, as Steve probably said earlier, that people can't travel overseas now, and they realise that, so they're thinking, well, okay, let's buy a boat then. And that market, the real estate market, the do-it-yourself market, is actually quite buoyant, retail sales here in New Zealand. So if we can get the cruising boats coming in, and they do want to put them on the market, like they have done in past years, then I think there is a market out there. I would say that we're probably in a transition period between a buyer's and a seller's market. We're in this kind of vacuum where you can't say it's one or the other. And I would agree with what Steve said about the condition of boats. That still applies. So, if you've got a well-presented boat, they sell, and they sell quite quickly. But if it's not well presented and it's got problems, then, they either get a reduced price on negotiation, or the boat, doesn't sell in the market. So that's pretty much the situation here in New Zealand. We're just sort of ticking along, but the election is definitely a factor that we'd have to, put in the mix here, because generally, as you commented earlier about elections, Brent, in New Zealand, things tend to just dry up a little bit around election time, and then they tend to pick up again afterwards.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and it might be stalling things a little bit compared to what we're seeing over here, because that's just not really amazingly, leadership seems to be reasonably steady, apart from Queensland's election up there, I guess, which is definitely having probably an impact on the borders being reopened and not. But we will see, I guess, in a few months. But yeah, certainly the inquiry rate is very high, and it does seem that stock levels are getting lower and lower, and they're drying up. So certainly those people out there considering selling that are afraid that they may not get a reasonable price for their boat, well, probably time to reconsider that position, because I think having a good chat to someone like Steve or Jason will give you a little bit more insight into what's happening out there and what we're experiencing in the market right now. We've had some other comments come through here. Troy's speculated here, I wonder if prices will drop after the pandemic. Well, the question is, when's the pandemic going to be over? Who knows? And what are we all going to be doing then? Very good question. No idea. It could be years away for all we know. But I think what's happening, and just to jump onto what you were finishing off there saying, Jason, is all of these things that we never realised were competition to boating seems to have disappeared, such as international travel, nice cruising adventures, perhaps, expensive international getaways. A lot of those things have disappeared, and people are turning back and going, well, what can I do? What can I do locally? And obviously, a nice catamaran is something you can live on board safely with your family, go cruising locally at least, and then obviously further afield as things relax a little bit. Jason, the Blue Lanes initiative with Fiji's been quite interesting, and there were quite a few boats in New Zealand that made their way over to Fiji for winter. So what's your take on that, and do you think that's going to open up anywhere else?
No, I don't. The boats that went up there were predominantly international boats. There's a few American boats that left New Zealand. Those Blue Lanes, I think, were set up as a sort of a forerunner to the America's Cup. So it still comes down to actually where this COVID-19 is going, because if it settles down and we don't get any big outbreaks and it's sort of managed, then I would assume that we'll get boats coming into New Zealand, and that will allow, those Blue Lanes will allow them to check in to Fiji. So it's another port for them to exit from, to come down here. But there hasn't been any massive exodus from here up there. People are pretty reluctant to travel, and the cruisers that are here are actually really enjoying it. The marinas are full. Boats are parked up everywhere, and they're just sort of like riding it out like a storm, and that's an interesting perspective on it, because these cruisers are, I think, just going to keep on cruising. They're not going to sell their boat or anything like that. They will have extensions in their temporary import entry for customs. So if international travel should free up, but I doubt it in the next 6 months, they would most likely just go home for a visit. But because things are so uncertain at the moment, nobody can really say what's happening anywhere with any confidence.
Mm. And if you've got a nice boat and you're enjoying nice locations, why stop? Yeah. Perhaps you've already got it set. So yeah, interesting. See what happens there. Certainly, it was pretty innovative to get that happening in Fiji, and I noticed a number of boats sent it up there. And not to get too far off subject, but what's going on with the America's Cup? We're going to see that in full swing with people coming in, or is that like with sailors and boats, they're all still arriving, or has that been clamped down a bit?
Well, the America's Cup, in terms of the America's Cup boats and crews and syndicates, will probably just do it. In terms of visitors, well, that's up to this virus again, and I would say a lot of us will be watching it on our screens.
Yeah, which is not a bad thing to do. It's pretty good coverage. Steve, just to go back to the charter fleets for a second, we had a comment here from Tim. G'day, Tim. Thanks for joining us. And he's made a comment here. Every charter company I've spoken to said that this season is fine with Queensland, but worry about next year as the Queensland market would have dried up, so they will need the rest of Australia to fill up next year. And that's probably a fair comment. Certainly in Sydney here, we have a little charter operation. You can see behind us here a number of these vessels are charter boats that we manage, and some that are individually owned. And we've pivoted a little bit with some of those boats. We've got couple of Seawind 1260s and a new Aquila 44 arriving soon that we're now doing bareboating or offering bareboating for Pittwater, and that market seems to have really taken off again. So I guess it comes back to where the pockets of the population are and where they want a holiday. But I would expect, if those borders are open again, Queensland's going to be flat out, don't you think, Steve? I mean,
oh yeah. Like as I said, when I sat with the charter companies, all those bookings that were going to take place have been deferred. A very, very small number of them cancelled. So it's exactly right. If you walk down the docks today and there are, more than normal boats sitting in a dock. But when the borders are open, all the charter companies, who we know very, very well, have said that they've got lots and lots of deferred bookings, and they're expecting, a good time. So they're going through a little tough patch at the moment, but they're just waiting for these borders to open and people will be going on. Just like we said before, they're not going to go overseas. So why wouldn't you go and charter a beautiful boat in the most beautiful place in Australia?
Yeah. We've had a question here from Brad and Lavinia. Are you seeing the same on power cats versus sailing cats? Well, we don't have too many power cats for sale, and there's a lot fewer of them on the market. But certainly, and I'll put this to you guys as well, certainly the new boat inquiries have really spiked again over the last couple of months, and we've had new boat power cats sell, a couple of new Aquila 44s. Steve, what's your take on the power cat used boat market?
Well, look, they're built in a lot less numbers. The boat I went and had a look at, one of the boats I had a look at in the Whitsundays, was a power cat. There was actually two power cats, an older one and a beautiful newer one. I went right through the charter companies with the charter company. Sorry, went through all the figures, and they're exceptional. Like, they're really, really showing a good return. And it's a beautiful boat, a three double cabin, three heads, stunning boat.
But I think probably the same principles apply, or the same theory would apply, that, people are moving on the water, and whether their interest is in sail or power, the same motivation applies, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. Like, as I've said a few times, I've been fortunate enough to sail around the Whitsundays many times, and you don't get sick of it. And whether you're on a power cat or a sailing boat, it's just being there and the beautiful islands and the whole scene. So certainly power cats are, great way to go. Don't have to pull sails up and down.
That's right. And just to fill people in from an international perspective again, and we touched on it earlier, but we do have a couple of cats in Europe. Ultramare 51 for sale over at the factory, and Seawind 1600 we've got coming on the books in the States, actually. And because both of those boats are actually fairly late model boats, and in fact still covered by factory warranty, which makes them even more interesting, because again, getting the confidence to go ahead and purchase the boat is probably a bit easier in those particular boats. And of course, if you want to get going straight away, well, then shipping is definitely an option. In fact, we have an Ultramare 5X booked on a ship due to leave mid-October, coming into Brisbane, and that's a 7-star yacht transportation ship. So those options are definitely around, where you can buy a late model boat, put it on a ship, bring it back to certainly Australia or New Zealand for that matter, drop it in the water. Obviously, you've got some taxes to consider as part of doing that. Even though I think, maybe even bringing your boat back and parking it in New Zealand for a little while is not a bad idea, to prepare, for hopefully when borders do open. before too long between Australia and New Zealand, but it's all speculation at the moment. But certainly, bringing a boat home is very much a doable option for those who want to get on the water on a late model boat where there's still some factory warranty that applies. So, so yeah, now we'll just see if there's any other questions out there coming through. I think we've answered most of them. So I guess the takeaway from today, though, is that there seems to be strong demand still, certainly in the Australian market, and I'd expect soon in the New Zealand market. For those who are considering or should be considering selling a boat, it's actually probably an opportune time to do that at the moment. And for buyers out there, get in touch, because boats seem to be moving even before they get officially on the market in some respects. Wouldn't you say, Steve? I think we've seen a couple of boats turn over before they before they even get advertised. So
if you're interested in buying a boat, we're always around. So give us a call, and we might know of something that's coming up that might just suit you. And in that case, the boats don't really hit the net. You get on the internet.
Yeah, excellent. All right, we'll leave it there today, guys. And thanks for joining us. And we hope to see you in person again soon. One day soon. All right. Have a great weekend. Thanks everyone for joining us. Talk soon.
Thank you.
See you later.